Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Mobility Week 2020. I'm glad everybody could join us on our virtual platform this year. Today, we're going to be discussing a very popular topic since the start of this pandemic, which is working from home. I'm going to have Stuart give a little introduction about what is working from home, some trends we've seen, and then I will specifically go into how South Florida Commuter Services has responded, as well as some programs we're offering. Before we get started, I do want to let everybody know that there is a question box on your window pane. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type those into the question box. I will be moderating those and viewing those, although we will save questions for the end. Just to give you a brief introduction, today we have Stuart speaking as well as myself. I'm Angelique. I am a transportation planner for South Florida Commuter Services. I've been here for roughly a year, and my background is in public administration. Stuart, if you'd like to say a few words about yourself and start your presentation, please feel free.
Great. I'm Stuart Anderson, and I'm working with the South Florida Commuter Services program to provide some assistance with regard to telework. With regard to my background, I became involved in telework just after the Northridge earthquake in Los Angeles. I was living and working in Los Angeles, and we discovered that certain businesses were back up and running within 1 or 2 days after this severe earthquake. But other employers were out of their office for up to about 3 months because there was damage. They did not have a telework program. They couldn't pull it together. And as a result, we received a grant in Southern California for $1 million to get out and talk to employers, help them establish formalized programs, help them to prepare for continuity of operations, programs for any future disasters that could occur. And I had the privilege of actually working with 500 employers across Los Angeles. I've done similar work in the San Francisco area, in Toronto, and here also in Florida. So hopefully between the various employers I've worked with, I can give you a little bit of a snapshot regarding telework and a little bit about how it's being applied today with regard to our pandemic. So with that, we'll go to the first slide. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what is teleworking, how is it defined? It essentially is allowing a person to work from home or another designated location. It's usually voluntary. Employers develop a criteria for selecting the right person and the right job. Most employees desire to telework. But it's also important to recognize that there are many employees who shouldn't telework or shouldn't telework full-time. Full-time teleworking can be very difficult for many employees. We often forget that some of our most important friends each day are coworkers. And when you're working from home, you can start feeling like you've lost your friends. This may sound a little bit odd, but this is something I've seen repeatedly. Teleworkers have wanted to stop teleworking because of weight gain. It sounds minor, but it has increasingly been an issue that has come up over time. So it's important to have the right person, the right job type, working from home, and an understanding about how frequent should that employee be working from home. It can certainly replace the commute. It saves costs. You need less money spent at the dry cleaner. But I think my last point is most important, which is that the workplace has changed so dramatically over the last few years. And I don't want to point it on a generation, but often people say the millennials have come in with a strong sense of quality of work life and a strong desire to balance their life between work and pleasure. And teleworking fits with that. And in Canada, there was a survey that was done, I believe, last year, where they asked employees, young employees, millennials, and younger, how important was working from home? How important was the flexible workplace? And could they put a value on it? And what they found through the survey is that those employees would accept a 10% decrease in their salary if given the opportunity to work from home. So that's how important it could be to this generation. In order to recruit talent, we need to be prepared to offer these options. Next slide, please. As far as teleworking, I've mentioned the full-time arrangement. Usually what we find to be most productive and effective and valued by employees is teleworking 2 to 3 days per week. Um, it shouldn't be a replacement for childcare or dependent care, unless, of course, there are employers who will use teleworking to help a parent on maternity or paternal leave gradually come back into the office context. So that makes sense. But on an ongoing basis, it's really difficult. I have 3 kids, and there'd be no way that I could maintain my child if my child was under 8. So I can appreciate that many of you feel that way as well. Um, One of the challenges is getting employers to not understand that when you're home, that you have less value and less opportunity for input. These are things that need to be thought about. And the last point is it's not always expensive. Next slide. Teleworking is most often done from home. A satellite work center is an example where, and I'll give you a real example. I worked with Bank of America in Los Angeles, and I worked with all of the branches in a telework program setup. What we discovered fairly quickly was that the local banks had spare office space. And so what we did is we actually set those spaces up for employees that worked further away so that they could work from that satellite site. So it was a Bank of America site, but it wasn't their normal office. And that worked tremendously well for them. Telework centers are often set up on a community basis. In Sacramento, California, there is a developer who created a community, kind of the ex-urban area of Sacramento, and in order to attract residents, he put in a telework center for folks that were living in that area. It can also be something that could be done on a cost basis. You could actually sell an office space for one day. Many years ago, it was $20 a day. I think that we're now looking at $60 a day at any of these centers. There aren't any that I'm aware of in the Miami-Dade, Broward area. And then also the concept of hoteling, which is instead of having a permanent office, there's an array of offices you could reserve, like a hotel room. So if you're working from home, but you want to go in on Tuesday, you go on the computer, you reserve your office, you go in. I actually worked with an employer that had employees put their belongings in a cart, and actually employees would come in, grab their cart, go to the reserved office space, and do their work, and then work from home the next several days. So there's many ways that we can do this. Next slide, please. I've covered a little bit about the issues with the generation and the flexibility that's needed in the workplace. There are just a few other items I wanted to talk a little bit about. Right now, most businesses, and even if you aren't talking to your IT folks in your own business, we have the technologies in most cases to have firewalls such that people can work from home. This has become very normal in most businesses. But where that isn't the case, I recommend that employers could go with something as simple as Dropbox, where they actually pass their files back and forth between the office. So these are things that can be set up even on a trial basis, but ultimately this remote access is very common. Today, something that's different from when I was out promoting teleworking in Southern California is that human resource professionals are now learning about teleworking in school. It's something that the HR professionals are expert in. Many of you right now are probably HR experts, so no doubt you have a good understanding of what this is. But one thing I do want to point out is that the rate of adoption of teleworking in the US has been much lower than most other countries. We sit around 12, 13, 14% of people will telework on a given day. But in Europe, it's around 35%. And then you go to South America, actually, some cities like Sao Paulo and others are even higher than that because of the tremendous traffic congestion. Why I point this out is because we have tremendous potential. These firms are very productive. They don't lose productivity because of telework. If we're at 12 to 14% now, why couldn't we get to 35? And now is our opportunity with COVID where we can prove that it does work, that we can do it successfully, and perhaps get people to telework more frequently. It's estimated now that we're going to probably see about 6 to 8% extra teleworkers. So for 12%, we add the 8%. We're going to about have 1 out of 5 American workers working from home on any given day. Now that's different from your total teleworkers. You could have all your employees teleworking, but they may only be able to do that once every 2 weeks. So it wouldn't be everyday coverage. It's also a great way to address some of the carbon initiatives that many employers are adopting these days. And this is a way to reduce that carbon footprint. Next slide, please. Today, we look at the flexible workplace. We also look at teleworking from the angle of recruitment and retention, carbon footprint, reducing overhead costs. A quick example, I worked with MetLife in Tampa, and they had an office building that had maxed out, but they needed to grow. They had a very expensive addition to the office that they were planning on doing, but we convinced them to go ahead and test telework and to see if they could actually accommodate those more employees. And it turned out to be tremendously successful. Not only did it replace the need to expand the business, but it also allowed them to recruit employees from further distances. So if you were living 3 counties away and it was a 2-hour drive to the office and you only had to do that once or twice a month, that's reasonable. And so it really opened up the labor pool for them. Next slide. We also know the importance of getting a good teleworker. We know that if you have a poorly performing employee and you send them home, you're almost guaranteed to have them perform even more poorly. That's actually based on research, not an assumption. If you have a good employee, they're going to be even more productive at home. Many employers will often set a threshold about who can telework, and they'll often say, let's say you're on a scale of 1 to 10 for your performance, that a teleworker has to score 7 or above to even be considered. So these are some things that are important to consider. The top reason why teleworking fails is because employers don't formalize their programs. And that's where we're sitting today. Many employers have adopted teleworking without having formalized policies in place and without an understanding of how it works, and without setting up things like core days. Core days are critical. So if you want for your department to all be in on Tuesday, then you can do all of your meetings on Tuesday. Or even if you're working from home, setting up times like 10 to noon, you need to be at your desk. So if you schedule a virtual meeting, people are going to be available. Otherwise, most employers let employees work flex time so they can pick the time that they work, and that's shown to advance productivity because people work the hours that work best for them. I would like to sleep in and start my workday late. When I'm teleworking, I can do that. But 2/3 of the people are not like me. 2/3 like to get up as early as possible. Next slide. Our biggest obstacle tends to be middle managers. We have often taught management to manage by objective, but we don't really put it in practice. When you're thrown into teleworking like we are now, you begin to understand that some people understood their training and some people didn't. And so that's important to consider. If you have a labor union consideration, certainly don't pitch your program as an increase for productivity. That is viewed today as exploitation of an employee. What we really want is for employees to have a better quality of work life. We want to use technologies to minimize overhead costs, and we want to be able to work virtually or together as effective teams. But if you're going into this on the basis of increasing productivity, you're simply saying we're not going to pay people more, we're going to send them home and they can work more hours all on their own. And that's not a good approach. 10 years ago, it was totally different. Next slide, please. Productivity gains are often very high. Managers end up liking programs We see a reduction in people that report sick. You know how when you're marginal and you just don't feel like going into the office, but you're good enough that you could work. We find that on average that you will reduce sick days by 2 to 4%. Next slide. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but if you have questions later. These are your typical implementation steps. I used to recommend employers do these things sequentially. Now I recommend that they choose from these things like a menu. Where are we weak? What do we need to do? Management's bought into this. We have a coordinator. We have a steering committee, but we're having trouble between teleworkers and telemanagers. So perhaps what we're missing here is doing a training and helping people understand how to work together. Next slide. Upper management, these are the things that typically sell. Again, I wouldn't go with productivity at the top of the list, but that has been the case, and that's what many talk about. But I think quality of work life and sustainability are important factors today. Next slide. And developing goals, you need to address many of these different things. If you'd like to get a copy of these slides afterwards, we can provide them to you so you can actually see the types of things you should be talking about as you work to formalize your program. Next slide. Assessing technology needs, most employers go into this often saying if you have a home computer that can access our server, then you can work from home. But afterwards, employers tend to be more generous. They start to see the lowering of overhead costs. I've seen employers go out and actually allow employees to purchase printers for their home office. These are things that you'll assess on your own. Next slide. Conducting a job assessment. I talked a little bit about this, the types of jobs that you have. I use actually a self-selection survey that I hand to teleworkers. I have them complete it, and it asks them questions about whether or not they have children that will be showing up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and they don't have a separate workplace, you know, and can that work together effectively? So people usually can assess whether they're good or not good. Supervisors can look at their performance. Next slide. Adjustments for management, managing by results, like I talked about earlier. Good communication is critical. I often recommend that if you have people teleworking, designate an IT person as the person for your teleworkers. That's been one of the biggest problems. When the computer goes down at home, who do they call? And they tend to be the lowest priority unless you specify a certain person is there for you. There's always a concern of loss of control. These are things that require communication between manager and employee. Next slide. Adjustments for employees. They certainly have to look at the teamwork. Where do they work together? How often do they work together? I have actually had supervisors tell me that they improve their communication and the availability for meetings by setting up these core times and setting up formalized ways of communicating to staff. The majority of actual business communication is informal, the majority. So if somebody goes and works from home and people are learning about it word of mouth, you have to have a communication mechanism that will allow them to be able to effectively communicate what they need. There may be certain organizational skills that are necessary. These are things that you can address in a training. And I mentioned earlier about the distractions in the home workplace. My final story, I actually, when I lived in Los Angeles, I had an Australian gentleman who never seemed to need to work living across the street. He would show up at 10 o'clock every morning with a cup of coffee for me, and he would sit and chat forever. And I used to say to him, I only have a 10-minute break, or whatever it took. Finally, I sat him down and I said, listen, just because you see my car in the driveway doesn't mean that I'm available to chat. And it was something that was hard for me to do at first, but I needed to communicate to everybody. This is when I'm working. With that, I'll turn it back to Angelique.
Thank you so much, Stuart. So just to reiterate, my name is Angelique Mercer, and I'm a transportation planner for South Florida Commuter Services. To give a general background on South Florida Commuter Services, It's a program of the Florida Department of Transportation, and we provide technical assistance, amenities, and benefits to South Florida's commuters to encourage the use of alternative transportation modes. So we're looking to get people out of single occupancy vehicles and reduce traffic on the road. We also reduce vehicle miles traveled in South Florida through a variety of transportation demand management strategies. We'll go over some of those a little bit later. We service counties Monroe, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River counties, District 4 and District 6. And our primary activities involve advocating for and highlighting the benefits of carpooling, van pooling, working from home, flexible work schedules, mass transit, cycling, walking, guaranteed ride home programs, and park and ride facilities. And we take a pretty active role in working with not only employers, but universities and governments across the broad spectrum of South Florida commuters. So the first thing South Florida Commuter Services did in regards to teleworking were some website changes on our end. So work from home was on our radar before the COVID-19 outbreak. It just seemed like the best time to put these resources into action was during the outbreak, since everybody was, for the most part, being sent home to work from home. So we rolled out some resources such as work from home agreement template. So and a template between an employer and an employee that says, you have to do this many hours and we expect your performance to be this, kind of what Stuart was talking before about this formalized program. A set of agreements, a set of do's and don'ts, a certificate, so that way there's training involved and everybody is on the same page about what the employer expects from the employees. We're also working with quite a few companies to understand how we can assist with overcoming work from home obstacles. Some of those obstacles Stuart's talked about, there are a lot of managers that are concerned whether or not their employees are actually working or not. There's equipment problems. There's all sorts of issues that some employers might have that we're working very closely to how can we overcome those obstacles? How can South Florida Commuter Services be of assistance? And just in general, how can we promote working from home as an alternative mode of transportation? I'll post these links in the chat at the end. These are the links to South Florida Commuter Services website to see the working from home resources that has that telework agreement template, a quick start guide, as well as a certification I will talk a little bit about in a couple other slides. Just kidding, the next slide. So we did partner with eWork and Best Workplaces for Commuters, and we're offering a 5-part telework certification series that helps managers and employees stand out in this crowded digital workplace. So you can see the screenshot towards the top of the screen. Those are actually some of the modules offered in the training. Working in a home office, negotiations at a distance, and then not only, I like a lot about this training is that not only is it from the employee point of view, but also from the employer point of view. So we have managing a distributed team and we have working on a distributed team. Right now, South Florida Commuter Services is offering this free to employers. I'll talk a little bit more about how to get access to this, but this training is valued at $138. It's very comprehensive, but it also isn't going to take 2 weeks to complete. You can see on the bottom screenshot, I actually completed it myself. That's the certificate that you'll receive once you complete the program. And so for a Telework certificate, to get access, and again, I'll post this link in the chat towards the end of the webinar, but if you go to our website and you hit flexible work resources and you scroll, there's a form that has first name, last name, phone number, and business email. If you submit that, that actually comes directly to me, and then you'll receive an email with some login information 3 to 5 days after form submittal. We are looking to get a little bit of insight into the certificate from the employers and the employees' point of view. So you'll find someone from my team or myself will contact you and ask how the training is going and what you thought of it, just to get some feedback on how it's going and how we can maybe adjust the training to be more beneficial towards employers. Another program we put out was the work from home survey. We wanted to get a better idea of what businesses were doing in regards to working from home. So we did send the survey out from July to October, and we covered businesses all throughout District 4 and District 6 from Monroe to Martin. And this mailer was focused on getting policymakers to take the surveys. So we were looking for managers, people in a position to actually enact working from home. But the primary objective was to create leads with companies for future TDM programs. So we did have 71 companies participate, and those are 71 companies that we can now work with a little bit closer and follow up with a little bit more in regards to TDM programs. And some insight we learned from the survey, prior to COVID-19, only 19 of these companies had a work from home policy in place. And even of those 19 companies that had a work from home policy in place, only 20% of these employees worked from home. And that was only part-time, it was not full-time. And then once the outbreak happened and we had the phase 1, phase 2, and everybody worked from home, 54 of these employers did offer work from home. We found that the other companies that did not offer a work from home program were companies that either had an obstacle that they weren't comfortable having their employees work from home, or companies that were unable to have their employers work from home because it just didn't work for the company dynamic. And then if you can see on the right, the bottom screenshot, we have, will your organization continue to implement working from home policies as a part of your post-COVID-19 operations? You can see we have about 21 of these companies that answered yes, we will continue this. And less than 5 companies actually said that they would not enact working from home as a permanent option. And we found a lot of this information to be really interesting because a lot of companies actually realized that they could reduce overhead and they could actually save some money when it comes to having employees work from home. More often than not, everybody already has the laptops and the speakers and the equipment, and the office is kind of just a general place for everybody to meet. But by eliminating that, the company is able to save money and able to create a more cohesive sense of employers. And so part of the survey initiative was partnering with Miami-Dade TPO to help administer a larger scale survey with them. And this went out to employers and employees. And so the results of this is going to help the TPO model working from home scenarios when they market to people or when they talk to people about working from home. So it was a really nice opportunity for us to be able to work with the TPO closely in regards to our survey and their survey that they sent out. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I did mention if anybody had any questions to please reach out to the question box. I will leave my information up as well as Stuart's information up. I'm going to go through some of the questions that were asked in the registration process, and then I'll go through some of the questions that we're receiving in the actual question box. Feel free to post these at any time. There's no limit to how many questions you want to ask. We have quite a little bit of time scheduled for the webinar, so feel free to ask whatever questions come up. So our first question is, knowing teleworking is here to stay, is the telework course offered for a limited time? So South Florida Commuter Services is offering this as long as supplies last. I believe Best Workplaces for Commuter is offering this telework program indefinitely as far as we know, unless something else comes up. But that's a great question. I know it is a very good resource. As far as our end, it's just a matter of supplies. And let me pull out the question pane. So we have Stuart, this is directed to you. It says, I'm interested in the employee productivity score and determination of who and when they can telework. Can you provide more information on this or possible case studies in which we can use?
Yes, as far as the productivity, uh, usually what we have found is that supervisors know whether an employee has been more productive, equally productive, or less productive if it's over at least a 3 month to 6 month time frame. What we found is if you try to assess any productivity changes within the first 6 months, usually, and definitely within the first 3 weeks, that we experience a significant Hawthorne effect. If you're familiar with that term, that just having a change and a change of a work environment will lead you to be more productive, but that over time that settles down. So that's partly how you assess the productivity of the teleworker prior to selecting the employee with regard to productivity. Again, usually managers have a good sense who their productive employees are. And what we have found is that even when we have built-in measurements for productivity, and I had quite a few employers over the years where they had a mutual fund company had a processing, how long it should take to process X number of forms. When we compared the actual productivity numbers against the perception of the supervisors, we found that supervisors were most often correct. I'm belaboring this a little bit because I want to point out that senior managers may want to have solid measurements of productivity change, but the reality is you might be wasting a lot of resources and time to try to come up with what that is. And I did have a client once who was County of Orange County in California, where they actually came out with things like your standard letter should take 17 minutes to write. And I just looked at that and I thought, oh goodness, no, this is an exhaustive effort that's not really necessary. Ask your supervisors. Employees have a good perception as well. And over a period of 3 to 6 months, the interesting thing that we found is that employees will evaluate their productivity less than how their supervisors might perceive them to be. And that's an interesting thing to really think about as you evaluate productivity. But selecting that right person is the way to go. It's not discriminating against another employee by saying that you may have to meet a certain criteria to work from home. I've known of a few employers who say you have to be with the company for a full year in the office before you can be a teleworker because they want you to be able to understand the corporate culture, develop personal relationships with people in the office. So these are many things that would need to be considered. I hope I answered your question there. If not, send it back in.
Uh, this isn't related exactly to the presentation, but someone did ask about the PowerPoint being available for download. As Stuart said, it will be available for download. Once the webinar ends, you'll receive a link to the recording as well as the webinar presentation. Just to put it out there. Let's see. We have any tips for small businesses? Oh, I lost the question. Any tips for small businesses who don't have HR departments and IT departments?
Yes, I mean, either way, you will still need to have a designated person, point person for your telework program. And usually that would be a person who could facilitate getting you assistance for any IT if they're outsourcing it. Let that person be your contact point for that. For HR, most small firms, employees have to be Jack and Jills of all trades to be able to function as a small employer. That can affect productivity and effectiveness. One thing to be particularly aware of with small firms is that the employees that are left in the office can be quickly overburdened when employees work from home because they're often looked to as the folks you have to go to when there's a fire, when there's an issue. And so if you have a clerical manager that has to take all of this information, expect to see a decrease in that person's productivity due to these extra demands, and actually has been quantified that in-office staff will likely increase a 4% decrease in productivity when you have the majority of the workers working from home. So make those adjustments. Otherwise, you're gonna develop a certain hostility from those that are in the office. The other thing I'd just like to mention, even in a small office context, it's really important to let everybody have this option if they meet the criteria. So even a clerical manager could work from home maybe once every 2 weeks or whatever that might be. Those are things to think about.
Thank you, Stuart. Let's see. Another question. You've mentioned South Florida Commuter Services provides free services to help businesses and organizations set up a tailored TDM program. How do we request your services and how soon does the program become available to the employees? So I'm going to actually put here in the chat for everybody our website. You can copy and paste that into your browser. A lot of our programs are actually simple forms on the website. A lot of the telework agreement, as well as the do's and don'ts of teleworking, you just click the button and you download it and you have it immediately. If you're interested in the Telework Certificate, that'll take about 3 to 5 days just because we actually have to register you and make you a login to access the program. For the most part, it's pretty immediate. So definitely, I would definitely check it out. Definitely feel free to add those resources to your work from home options. And we have, does the Telework Certificate benefit employees for working on managers for setting policy? I'm a little confused by the wording of the question. If you want to send in some follow-up to that, but I will start and see if we get to the right spot. So the Telework Certificate or not, does the Telework Certificate benefit employees for working or not on managers for setting policy? So the Telework Certificate more goes into how to work from home efficiently for employees versus managers. We do have that one section that is managing a distributed team. When I went through that, it was very comprehensive as far as how you should treat your employees, as well as managing productivity. But these specific factors that Stuart's talking about like measuring your job's productivity, that would be more internal. The training doesn't exactly cover that because it's different for each company. How could South Florida Commuter Services compare their productivity to another company's productivity? So the Telework Certificate will give you guidelines, but it would really be up to you to determine what productivity means to you and your company. So I hope that answered the question. If not, definitely post it back in there. I'll give it a couple minutes for any other stragglers with any questions to come through. Again, so the information, my information and Stuart's information is up on the screen. The link to our website is in the chat. So definitely get your questions in if you have any other questions. For now, I'm going to briefly speak on a couple more items that are happening during Mobility Week. So we have the Love to Ride Florida Challenge, and that's at lovetoride.net/Florida. And this is getting people on their bikes, exercising, taking recreational trips, encouraging people to take those small 1 mile, 2 mile trips with their bike. There are opportunities to win one of 3 bikes. There's opportunities to win gift cards to bike shops, to win bike gear, and all you have to do is ride for 10 minutes to be entered. In addition, we have the Mobility Week virtual room. If you haven't checked it out already, it's pretty comprehensive. It's a very cool idea. It's at mobilityweekfl.com, and this has all 7 districts. It has all of the projects that we wanted to highlight and informational material. I know District 4 and District 6 did a series on COVID safety as far as public transportation goes on the GO Line, Tri-Rail, Palm Tran, BCT, etc. So I would definitely check out this virtual room. It's almost like being in a little Sims game, you could say, where you get to basically walk around yourself and click on the TV screen or click on a laptop. It's very comprehensive, and I believe everybody would enjoy it. It's been very wonderful. We did have one more question pop up. Do you have a sample policy for telework? Yes, we do. If you go onto our website and you hit for employers and you hit flexible work resources, we do have a sample agreement and a sample policy that you could download and tailor to fit to the needs of your company. But I think that's all the questions that we have here. Again, I'll put our information back up on the screen. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email myself or Stuart. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions. But again, thank you for joining us during Mobility Week. Stuart, thank you so much for coming out and speaking. I really appreciate it.
My
And I hope
pleasure.
everybody has a wonderful weekend. Bye,
Thanks.
Stuart. Thank you.